Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to look at the background of English criticism through two Greek masters. As we saw earlier in our previous video lecture, we spoke about the first ever criticism written by Aristophanes in the form of a play. Well, Plato lived around the same time, somewhere around 427 BC to 348 BC. But unlike Aristophanes, Plato was not an artist by himself. He was not a playwright. He was a philosopher. Moreover, he was a disciple of Socrates. We all know Socrates. Socrates was a very famous philosopher. So while Plato looked at while being a philosopher, he was familiar with works of artists, who preceded him. He followed these artists. He had seen the plays of these artists, the art of these people. Okay, Phidias and Polygnotus were artists of a preceding era. Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes. He was familiar with the works of all these people. He had seen plays of these people. Now, during Plato's time, philosophy flourished. Philosophy and oratory flourished as compared to the previous era where art and literature flourished. Literature was mainly focused upon poetry and drama. Okay, so he was familiar with the poetry and drama of the preceding era and also the current discussion, the discourse that was going on during his time. During his period, people were mainly concerned with philosophy and oratory. So there were people like Parmenides and Empedocles and Socrates who were philosophers, and Gorgias and Antiphon and Lysias who were very great and prominent orators. Now, their prime concern, the prime concern of these philosophers was citizen and the state. Citizen and the state, as in they mainly focused upon the individual, person, and how that person's actions affected the state and how the state had a stake in an individual's development, okay, an individual's growth. All right, so this directly affected this, and this again directly affected this. So see, you have to be, all the citizens have to have mental and physical health to build a good state, okay, a strong state. All right, so that was the main concern. Again, the major concerns of the time, I've listed it out here for you. We've got city and the state, that was a prime concern. The quest for truth. The philosopher were concerned with the quest for truth, as in, what is truth? How does it signify in a person's life? How does it signify in the growth of a country? Okay, and how do you arrive at it? These were the questions that were the philosophers of the time were concerned with. They challenged the beliefs and conventions. See, you must have come across Socrates at some point of time in your school study or your higher education. Socrates was mainly known for questioning the standard practices of his time, the standard beliefs of his time. So that was a main reason why he was assassinated, why he was, why he was not so popular with the state himself. Okay, people did not like him because all the practices that they were doing. I mean, you have a certain practice, you have a certain ritual. I come and tell you, hey, really, what stupidity is this? Why are you doing it? Okay, come on, prove it to me that what you're doing is in any way good for you or the people around you. What would you do? Hey, come on, how could you question me like that? Would you won't really hold me any high esteem, right? So the philosophers were, not held in any great regard, mainly because they questioned the beliefs of and the conventions and practices of the time. The value of literature to society. This was another concern. The philosophers were, indulging, had discussed about. So they wanted to think about the value of literature to society. Why is literature necessary to society? Is it necessary at all? How is it affecting the society? Is it doing any good? Is it contributing to the building up of the society? Or is it breaking it down? Or is it degrading the society in somehow? Yeah, that was another one of the concerns. Nature and function of literature. So, what is the nature of literature? Okay, that was one of the concerns. Function of literature. What should it do? Nature is different, function is different. When you think of nature, you think about how literature is made of. What is literature made of? That would be nature. The function is how does the literature work? Or how should it work? That was another one of their major concerns. Age of critical inquiry. It was the age of critical inquiry, as in they critically inquired everything. Because see, before this period, that is during Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, or Aristophanes' time, or even before that, Homer or Hesiod's time, people were not really worried about the moral implications of the work they produced. Moral implications, as in they did not worry about how their plays, how their words are going to affect people. If, mostly they were just writing a lot of lyrics, or they were writing a lot of drama. So any lyric, they wrote it for their own pleasure or for giving pleasure to people. So pleasure in itself is very dangerous. You have to agree with that. Because see, there are good movies, there are bad movies, there are good books, there are bad books. So when you read a bad book, okay, when you just if imagine there are no good books at all, okay, or at least you're not exposed to any kind of good book, you're only exposed to bad books, what would happen? You would start assuming that everything that you read in those books is correct. It is what is right. And you won't have a binary to judge it with. Binary as in a good versus evil. Only when you see evil, you understand good. When you see good, you understand what is evil. And you get to choose one from the other. That is how a moral, our moral standards are built. That's how a character is built. Now, what happens? These people, they were not concerned with the moral implications, how it is going to affect the society, or the affect the individual. They were not concerned about that. So, what happens? Great deal of, incongruity, a great deal of weeping, wailing, a great deal of cynical laughter, of satire is in itself good, but cynicism is not. Yeah, uh, uh, you know, plenty of characters that were degraded. They were held as standards. They were appreciated. Their actions, emotions were replicated by people. Whoever saw those plays or read the poetry or the epics. So here, since it was in the age of critical inquiry, they started questioning everything that was going around them. Okay, so they wanted to question whether whatever trends that have been set, are they good or are they bad? Okay, that was a major concern. So here, dialogues would be the work of Plato, or or you could call it a series of philosophical discussions that you find in different books. Okay, so mostly it's called dialogues mainly because they are in a question answer form with multiple voices. So Plato did not really just write one book as such. He wrote plenty, but each one is in the form of a dialogue. That's why they are collectively called as dialogues. Okay, I should have italicized it here. I forgot to do that. Anyway, so it's mostly in a question answer form with multiple voices, as in like it's as if like each book contains a series of dialogues. He would take up one discussion, and it would not be restricted to one facet alone. See, for instance, if he had started talking about say society, he wouldn't restrict himself to society alone. He would talk about literature, he would talk about art, he would talk about the economy, he would talk about the politics, he would talk about even medicine sometimes, or agriculture, or how agriculture contributed to the society, and how what best method there was to to improve the economy of a state, or what rights the state had on the individual, what rights the individual had on the state, what the duties of the individual were, what the duties of the state was. All these discussions were were formed as in dialogue forms. Okay, they were created in dialogue forms, and you have plenty of books. I've just mentioned a few here. Okay, Ion, Cratylus, Protagoras, Gorgias, Symposium, Republic, Phaedrus, Philippus, and Laws. I mean, there may be more. I'm not familiar with them. This is all. This is a list of procured for you. Okay, so the chief of it is this Republic, because in Republic is what he speaks mainly about poetry. All right. So in Republic, he speaks mainly about poetry, its importance, its function, or the harmful effects of poetry mainly. Because, well, we'll come to that later. But you need to remember that in most of his dialogues, the chief voice is that of Socrates. It is as if Plato and Socrates are discussing it. As if Plato is questioning Socrates and Socrates is answering him. Plato is raising, queries. He's inquiring, and Socrates, as a wise man, he is answering everything. But you also have to remember that whatever he attributed to Socrates was his own viewpoint, was Plato's own viewpoint. Okay, even though it is as if Plato and Socrates are discussing the issue, Plato has already formed an opinion, and he's just using Socrates' name most of the time to drive home his point. Whose point? Plato's point. Okay. Well, now, so what was his view on art? Basically, he had this what is now popularly known as the theory of ideas. The theory of ideas. And what is idea? We all have idea, right? Anything that is thought. Now see, he had this theory wherein idea itself is the ultimate reality. An idea of a thing, anything for that matter. You take up a table, a laptop, a tree, or a natural, any artificial man-made thing, or a natural object. Anything that exists in the form of idea first. He says like everything exists in form of an idea. Okay, that is the ultimate reality. And the thing of which the idea is, the thing is what is a copy of an idea. Okay, things are conceived as ideas before they take practical shape as things. So idea is the impetus from which a thing is born. I know you really need to apply yourself to understand this concept. First, the idea exists in our minds. Okay? Then that idea is seen as a thing. So what happens is the idea is real and the thing itself is a copy of an idea. So imagine, just close your eyes, think about a tree. Okay, think about a tree. So to put it practically, I would suggest you to imagine this. When you ask a child to draw a tree, okay, you just ask any child, say about a kindergartner, say about 4 or 5 years old kid, to draw a tree. What does a tree look like? Well, most of the time it is shapeless. I understand that. But still, what would the tree look like? It wouldn't matter what tree it is, first of all, okay? He wouldn't be able to differentiate between a mango tree or an apple tree or any other tree. Basically, there'll be huge fat trunk, yeah, and on top of it, the stems would go here and there haphazardly, and there'll be plenty of leaves, full green. There'll be no shade, different shades of green. No, all leaves would be of the same color, and there'll be both flowers, fruits, vegetables hanging on every single branch, right? So this is what he is, according to me, he's talking about. A tree would comprise of everything. It would be healthy, as in like a fat trunk. It would be, it would have plenty of greenery and plenty of branches. It would have both, fruits and flowers and vegetables all put together. A tree itself, as an idea, as a concept, is far more richer than the actual tree. An actual tree may have some dried leaves. An actual tree may have only flowers or only fruits, and even if it has both flowers and fruits, there will be, far too many flowers and very few fruits. Yeah, and the branches may be far less as compared to the drawing itself. So no, even the drawing itself is is a thing, but I am talking about the mental concept, the idea of a tree. The idea of a tree would be far more richer and far more complete than the tree itself. Okay, it's just an example. It's just an example. We are given to understand how Plato thought about this. Okay, his theory, how he devised this theory. The theory, according to Plato's theory, what happens is the idea exists first. Idea is real. Okay, the idea itself is real, and the thing of which the idea is a copy, of an idea. And art, as we all know, copies life. So the life would itself, which is the life which comprises of all the things of humans, non-humans, of things, of animals, of birds, of trees, of furniture, of how homes, of everything, okay, equipment. Literature, art as in like art comprises of all these things. Literature, painting, sculpture, all of these things. Art is a reproduction of things. Okay, art replicates life, right? It imitates life. Art imitates life. So when you think of art in terms of literature or painting or sculpture, it is merely a reproduction of things. And what is thing? Thing itself is a copy of an idea. And what is idea? Idea is the original pattern. You get my point? So hence, copy here is a thing. Copy is once removed from reality. That is, it should say thing here. Hence, thing is once removed from reality, and art is twice removed from reality. So this is the ultimate, idea, theory of idea he arrives at, that art is twice removed from reality. So whereas ideas are perfect, what is in our mind, the concept itself is perfect, the thing of which the concept is imperfect. Now art imitates things, so it is more imperfect. Okay, so art takes us away from reality. What is the conclusion here? Art takes us away from reality. We need to be real, right? We have a very real existence here. We need to know, we need to be made aware of what is real. But what is art doing? Art is taking away from reality. It is giving us false ideas. It is giving us false impressions of perfection which do not exist anywhere. What does art give you? Okay, in literature, there are all those heroes and heroines who are really perfect. They are beautiful, brilliant, talented, intelligent, kind, generous, forgiving, all the all the extraordinary attributes are given to, the characters in literature, which is not real, which is unreal. What is real? You and I are real, right? And are we in any way, do we in any way resemble the characters of a literary work? We do not. We are made of both good and bad. We may be intelligent sometimes, we may be stupid sometimes, we may be, beautiful in some way and not so perfect in others. We may be generous at times and we may be stingy at times as well. Yeah. So reality is twice removed, is far removed from art. Even the painting, you see the house, it looks one way, and you look at the painting of the house, wow, you wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe the resemblance. It's made to look beautiful. Even the sculptures. Have you seen any ugly sculptures? Have you seen any ugly statues anywhere? Okay, there are gargoyles, but no, we're not talking about gargoyles. They are really ugly, or the gnomes, they are ugly as well. But otherwise, whatever sculpture you have seen, they are made to look perfect, which is not quite possible, which is not real. So art is misleading, okay? It takes us away from reality. Hence, anything that takes us from reality is dangerous. So it is dangerous to society because we are going to live in a false, we are going to have false conceptions about life. You're going to have false, false expectations from life. Yeah, that would be dangerous to society and the individual. His attack on poetry. See, he was not very fond of poetry. Apparently, he read them. That's why he is able to form a proper judgment or an opinion in the first place. You cannot have an opinion on anything unless you have experienced it, right? So his attack on poetry is that basically on the basis of poetic inspiration. What is inspiration? Inspiration is thought and feeling. More than thought, inspiration would be merely feeling. You are inspired. Inspired as in you all of a sudden you feel very strongly about something. You have this strange idea within yourself that you could write, you could create something. Out of the blue, the poet can create characters. He can, of course, he has his basis on, the people, the world around him, but still, he has his lyrics or his drama or his epic or whatever he's creating. He would rely very strongly on inspiration. Of course, he would apply a little bit of thought into it, but mainly the main source of his genius would be inspiration. The poet relies on inspiration rather than reason. He would not reason out things. He would just be inspired. He would just feel and write. He wouldn't think and write. While inspiration is feeling, reason is thought. Okay. Poetry versus philosophy. He spoke extensively in especially Republic, or one of his dialogues called Republic. In it, he speaks very extensively about the merits of poetry, the demerits of poetry and the merit of philosophy. He says how poetry misleads and philosophy leads. Okay, while philosophy tries to arrive at truth, poetry tries to take you away from truth. While philosophy makes you feel real, gives you real concerns, real issues to occupy yourselves with, poetry makes you indulge in pleasure, which is not very good for society. Because see, he believed that every individual has to contribute to the well-being of the society. Okay, every individual, that in every man, woman, child, has to contribute to the building up of society, of the well-being, contribute to the well-being of the society. Philosophy can do that. He says philosophy deals with reality. Philosophy deals with inquiry. It asks and questions about life, how life should be led, what should be its main concern. Philosophy does not do that. Philosophy only pleases the senses. Okay, pleases the senses as in you feel good after reading poetry. I mean, I understand many of you may not be very fond of poetry. You can just think about the songs. Okay, you listen to songs, right? Why do you listen to songs? What is so good about songs? It all says the same thing. All has the same lyrics. Just the words are rearranged this way or that way to make it look a little different. Why do you listen to songs? It gives you pleasure. Whereas philosophy, it is not concerned with pleasure. Of course, you would be pleased when you arrive at a certain truth. It is another kind of pleasure, but it requires work on your part. Okay, so this is far more important compared to this. That is according to Plato. No poet, the S should not be here. Okay, no poets here. No poets in the ideal commonwealth envisaged in the republic. So republic mainly deals with an utopian, state. An ideal commonwealth would be a place, a state which is ideal. State as in a country or a place, which is ideal, which is perfect. So he says there won't be a single poet allowed into that place. An utopian concept, you know what utopia is, right? An ideal place, an ideal state. So there won't be any poet allowed in that kind of place unless they composed hymns and panegyrics. So hymns and panegyrics hymns would be for gods and goddesses, and panegyrics would be of great men, praising great men, or telling stories about the great feats of those people. So unless it is of a very high standard, no poet would be allowed into that commonwealth. Okay. See, you can apply all these concepts to the songs you listen to. That would be more easy for you to relate to. You listen to all these songs. There are good songs, there are bad songs, there are songs that are so stupid you don't know what to do with them. I mean, I don't know what to do with them, but still, you can try to put poetry in that place. Try to, in terms of songs, what are stupid songs of any use to anyone? They're just pastimes. They just please you to some extent, maybe because of the rhythm, or maybe because of the singer who has sung it so well that you want to listen to it again and again. But honestly, do they contribute to the society in any way? And there are so many vulgar songs that people actually sing aloud out loud in public, which is really weird, concerning that they even come from very conventional families, which would not be allowed in normal speech, that you wouldn't even talk to with your parents or your friends, or anyone you respect. Because see, vulgarity breeds vulgarity. Okay, and it is only possible to exist where you don't respect the person you are addressing to. Anyway, here, why is it hidden? So try to apply these concepts to the songs, and you would be able to better understand why Plato was so very against poetry of his time. Okay, we would come to it later, but I would also like to tell you that when Plato attacked poetry in general, he also held certain kinds of poets and poems that were really good, that were contributing to the moral makeup of a person, moral makeup of an individual. Okay, so again, the second, something else he was concerned with was the emotional appeal of poetry. Again, it is another reason why he attacked poetry. First would be because of the poetic inspiration, because a poet writes only because he feels and does not think. The second idea is that of the emotional appeal of poetry. Poetry affects emotion rather than reason. It reaches or talks to the heart instead of the intellect. Okay, what he believes, what he feels is that poetry affects the emotion of a person. It makes you feel emotional, sentimental. How many of you really feel that feel all the time. And how many of you think that it is actually good to be so very feeling, so very emotional or sentimental all the time, that you give up all reason and thought? Well, there are people who indulge excessively in emotions, and nobody likes them, and it's not a very healthy way to be. Okay, a healthy state to be. Okay, you have to use your heart, but more than that, you have to use your intellect. Okay, it has to go together. Actually, you cannot exclude one from the other. You cannot only use your heart alone, nor could you use your intellect alone. You cannot only be emotional, you cannot only be reasonable. Okay, you have to have both together accordingly. Emotion, being impulse of the moment, cannot be safeguarded as reason. So what happens when you are emotional? You do not think, you just feel, and you act impulsively. Impulsively means you wouldn't really give it much thought. You just act on the spot without thinking. See, for instance, when you are angry, what do? If you have a little bit of thought, if you have a little bit of reason, you would think before you speak. All right? But if you are impulsive, if you're too emotional, if you're given to emotion, ruled by emotion, there are people who are ruled by emotion. Immediately, as soon as they get angry, what do? Start shouting at you. Right? So, see, being impulsive is not good for anyone. See, for instance, if I'm like, I am suddenly very happy. Okay? I'm suddenly very happy. And in that impulse, within that pulse, see, impulse arrives from that word pulse, within seconds. Okay? Within seconds, in that moment, what do? I promise someone a huge gift, or like a huge favor or something, which obviously I cannot do. Practically thinking, later on, when the impulse has passed, when the emotion has, when I have come down from the high of being happy, I think rationally, because ultimately I am going to think about it, right? Rationally, I feel, oh my God, what stupidity! Why did I promise such a thing to her? Being impulsive is not good for anyone. So he says emotion, being impulse of the moment, cannot be safe, guys, as reason is. Okay, reason lets you think properly and arrive at proper conclusions and make proper decisions, which is not possible if you are emotional. Again, the tragic poetry, he was like especially during his preceding era, there were so many great tragedies written. Okay, they are still popular. Okay, but this tragic poetry included a lot of weeping and wailing. Weeping as in crying. Everyone would be crying a lot. The women would be crying a lot. Even the men would be crying, and a lot of wailing. They would be screaming, and uh, extremely melodramatic. There is drama and there is melodrama. Drama would be simply simple and plain acting. Melodrama would be taking it to the excessive point where you just don't want to watch it. At least you wouldn't want to watch it if you have a refined taste. But still, the tragic poetry included a lot of weeping and wailing, which was not good for anyone, which was not healthy for anyone. Okay, for if we let our own, I'm sorry, it's supposed to be R here. If we let our own sense of pity grow strong by feeding upon the griefs of others, it is not easy to restrain it in the case of our own sufferings. He says, for if we let our own sense of pity, so if someone is really going through a bad phase, you need to sympathize with them, you need to feel sorry for them, of course. But if when you are exposed to excessive melodrama, what happens is you and it has become a norm, you start pitying them. Okay, you start pitying them so much, feeding upon the griefs of others, because see, when you pity someone, again, it is a kind of pleasure. You may ask, you may wonder, how is pity a form of pleasure? But see, there are people who find a kind of strange pleasure when they see other people, people's misfortunes or other people's griefs. if someone else is going through a bad phase, someone else is going through a misfortune, has occurred a misfortune to them, these people would feel happy. Not really happy, they would not be celebrating or enjoying, but they would, like, indulge in pitying that person. Yo, so and so happened to that person, so bad, what is she going to do now? you know they make a job of it. So what happens is, when you start pitying too much, you won't be able to restrain it in your own case. Okay? Because what happens is that you are used to pitying others now. Okay? Imagine yourself in that place. You're used to pitying everyone and anyone. If someone is, like, divorced, she's divorced now, what is she going to do? How is she going to earn her livelihood? Where is she going to live? Who is going to take care of her? You feel so pitiful about that person. Okay? And, or maybe if someone else, someone else died, you feel so sorry for that person. You, like, go on and on, postulating about how, what a tragic fate, what a tragic end that person suffered. Or if someone is met with a disease or illness of some kind, you make an issue of it, you go around talking about it, you feel so sorry for that person. But God forbid the same thing happens to you. Of course, you won't be there to pity yourself when you die, of course, but still, God forbid, a certain misfortune occurs to you, you will feel all the more pitiful. You will pity yourself so much that you wouldn't have the strength to come out of your grief, come out of your misfortune. Because bad things happen to everyone. But there are people who just, indulge in self pity and labor under the same thing, for so long that they have no way of coming out of it. And there are people who really put in the effort and do everything in their power to, make life come back to a normal state of being. So again, this making one more emotional, excessively emotional, is one of the reasons why Plato thought poetry was bad for society. Again, now, poetry fed and watered the passions instead of drying them up. Poetry fed and watered the passions instead of drying them up, in the sense, whatever passions you have, you may feel certain things. As humans, we are bound to feel, we are bound to have certain passions. I may have a little bit of anger in me, a little bit of greed in me, a little bit of, vengeance in me. I may feel vengeful about something. But what poetry does is, it flames the passion. Okay? And let them rule instead of ruling them as they ought to be ruled. No? Passions ought to be ruled. It should not rule you. What poetry does is, it makes, passions rule our reason. So when we are led by passion, when we are led by our emotions alone, we end up making very stupid decisions in life. With a view to the happiness and virtue of mankind, the main reason why we need to rule passions is because the happiness and virtue of mankind will be more happy and will be more virtuous, will make less mistakes, okay, in life. All right. Its non-moral character. Another reason why he despised poetry is because of its non-moral character, as in, he indicts poetry for its lack of concern with morality. He felt that, okay, it did not give you a proper, it did not give you a proper way to improve your character. Okay? He indicts, as in, he accuses poetry for its lack of concern with morality. Poetry did not concern with improving your character. Poetry treats virtue and vice alike. What happens in poetry, at least the poetry of his times? I mean, I wouldn't, if you read later poems or later English poems, you would feel that that this thing is false. But then you have to remember that most or all of Plato's opinions depended upon the kind of poetry he was exposed to. Okay? He saw these kind of poems, only these kind of dramas, and he well, he had to form this kind of judgment. Okay, poetry treats virtue and vice alike. So during his time, all the poems, the poets, they did not, hold virtue in high esteem, or they did not, denigrate vice to the, they did not degrade vice. Okay, virtue often comes to grief. In most of the poems, what you see is anyone who is virtuous, someone who is really wholesome, who is a very noble, that person comes to grief. And he bases his opinion on the writings of all these poets: Homer, Pindar, Hesiod, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. All these poets wrote wrote poems in which virtuous people often come to grief. So wrongdoing, in most of the poems, what happens is wrongdoing is profitable and righteousness is damaging to oneself. So anyone who is doing wrong things, he profits. Anyone who is very righteous, who is good, he is, he has done some gross damage to himself. Portrayal of gods and men unfavorable. So you also have to remember that most of the writers wrote about gods and goddesses, but then their gods and goddesses were not flawless. Okay, gods and goddesses were not flawless in the depictions. The way they were depicted was really unfavorable. The men, they were led by all sorts of bad traits. Like most of them, they were either very greedy or very prideful, or they were very vengeful, or they were lusty. They did not, they pursued things that were not really good for anyone. Both given to various vices and uncontrollable passions. So both gods and men depicted in the poems of these people, how were they? They were given to vices. Okay, they had all sorts of bad habits. There were gods who, indulged in too much drinking. There were gods who, of course, I mean, when you look at Greek poems, there is too much of vulgarity in it. It is not even, you could not even call it innuendos. Then there is explicit vulgarity in it. And of course, uncontrollable passions. They were led by passions. Whatever they thought, they had to do it. Okay, whatever they felt, they had to fulfill their passions. So there was no control for their passions. So in the later, in my next video, inshallah, we'll be dealing with the functions of poetry, and then comments on drama, and his observation on style and value of criticism. For now, thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope you understood everything we discussed today. I've tried to go slow and have tried to make it as clear as possible. If you have any doubts, I'm here to answer them. Thank you.